have a wonderful speaker joining us, Dr. Laura Bernstein, to take us through what we're calling the talent games, activating and retaining A-plus players. Laura comes to us. She is a great friend of the college, former CEO and owner of Vision Point Productions, a business specializing in media training resources and performance improvement. Laura is the immediate past president of the Instructional Systems Association and now serves on their board. Most recently, Dr. Bernstein served as Executive Vice President of Learning Solutions for our partner, Global Corporate College. She is currently serving as a talent development consultant and can be found from time to time on the national circuit speaking with organizations such as the Association for Talent Development, ATD, and the Society of Human Resources, or SHRM. We're thrilled to have Dr. Bernstein with us today. Dr. Bernstein?
Hello, everyone. It is wonderful to be with you today as we talk about the talent games. And you might have noticed that we are going to be drawing a correlation between what we talk about today and the ever so popular movie series based on the book, The Hunger Games. And it's based on the book by Suzanne Collins, which, of course, is set in the future. And what I'd like to do before we get started is have everybody use the interact feature at the top part of your screen to show a sort of raise your hand. We can see a show of hands in terms of how many people have either read the book or seen one or more of the movies in the Hunger Games series. So if everybody can take just a moment and do that, that would be wonderful. And Sonia or Patty, are you able to see what the result is of that?
We have the majority saying that they have seen the movie. There's just a couple there that have not, so we'll just have to explain our correlations throughout the presentation.
Okay, sounds wonderful. So very briefly, the movie is, again, set in the future. And our heroine is Katniss Everdeen, and she takes her sister Prim's place in being chosen by what is a very cruel and sadistic capital to participate in the Hunger Games, which is a fight to the death between teenagers from each of the 13 districts. And the last survivor, the last teenager to survive, is the winner, and there can only be one winner. And there are 2 teenagers chosen from each district, and Katniss is joined by someone named Peeta, who is the baker's son in her district. So we're going to be drawing a correlation, again, between our content and the games. So let's start by talking about what our game plan is. So in the Hunger Games, the actual game itself is controlled and monitored by this capital, this sadistic capital. And in our world, when we think about how we create an onboarding process, we get people up to speed, we lead, we develop, we go about our everyday, day-to-day work experience. In our world, we have organizational leaders and HR leaders, but of course, everything isn't run like a game. It's much more complex than that. And what we have in common with the Hunger Games is that we can heavily influence the outcome of the game based on how we approach. So today we're going to take a look at 3 common onboarding processes and talk about how they are culturally relevant and how they can be aligned to our organizational strategy. And then we're going to talk about 3 strategies that are part of the employee life cycle: attraction, attachment, and alignment, and how all 3 of these lead to heightened engagement, which, of course, if we get heightened engagement, that leads to better retention of what I'm calling A-plus players. We're going to spend most of our time on attachment, but we're going to touch on all 3.
Great. So as Laura was suggesting, in the Hunger Games, players are selected by what they call a lottery system, so random selection. But in our world, we choose our players, obviously, a little bit more carefully. Let's get some input now from you, the group, using our chat feature, which you can find to the left of your screen. And we have a few questions on the screen. What is an A player? What can you expect from an A player? And what does an A player expect from you? And keeping those questions in mind, just take a moment and select one of those questions to respond to, just using the number, and then give us some of your thoughts around one of those questions. So if you have a comment for what an A player is, just put the number 1, and then a few comments about what an A player looks like to you.
So I'm going to pause.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just a moment and allow everybody an opportunity to reflect for just a second and start their thoughts. And then we'll jump in and review some of the comments that you are sharing, and then we will also share some comments as well. Okay, so while some of you are still writing your comments, I'm going to go ahead and start with the first question: what is an A+ player? And I think there are different ways we can describe an A+ player, but these are people who are highly, highly proficient. They're individual contributors, but while they're individual contributors, at the same time, they're able to raise the collective output of their peers and their other colleagues. So the key point about an A+ player is they're not just a good employee or a high-functioning employee, but the key point really has to do with the impact that their productivity and their presence has on other people. And so if we think about how in the Hunger Games, how Katniss interacted with the other players and how she impacted them both on and off the field, we can see the correlation that it wasn't just about her and how she behaved in the Hunger Games, but it was also how she interacted and how everybody else began to change throughout the Hunger Games based on her communication style, based on how she survived, and based on how she interacted with everybody. So an A+ player, great employee, but has to be able to lift the collective output of everybody else. Looks like we have a comment from somebody. Sonia, can you reveal what that is?
Absolutely. So Mark chimed in on question 1, what is an A+ player? In his comment, an A+ player is someone who shows up ready to contribute to the overall mission we're trying to accomplish, which is providing an excellent experience to our clients. They are proactive and are always thinking of ways to improve that.
Fabulous comment. Thank you very much. And kind of moving from what is an A+ player, let's look at what can we actually expect from A+ players. So A+ players bring ideas, they bring creativity, they bring solutions. Typically an A+ player has a very large capacity for work, they're resourceful, a large capacity for getting things done, connecting people. And if we think about the Hunger Games, we remember how Katniss always found a way to solve a problem. It wasn't always maybe the traditional way or what we thought might be the way, but she always had a way to solve a problem. And let's move on to the last question as well, about what does an A+ player expect from us. So one of the key things that we need to keep in mind about A+ players is that we can't just hire A+ players and then not give them the environment and the resources and the support that they need to thrive, because they need to do more than survive. They need to thrive in our environment. So they need opportunities, they need challenges, they need low bureaucracy. They need us as leaders to get out of their way so that they can move the vision and the mission forward. So if we think about the Hunger Games, we can remember how Katniss needed the help of Hamish, who was sort of her handler in the Hunger Games, and he helped her to create opportunities, but then he let her be. He let her move forward with the opportunity. So an A+ player really needs us to sort of set the stage and have that environment in order to be able to thrive in our environment, or they leave, and obviously we don't want them to leave. If you have additional comments that you'd like to contribute to the discussion, please go ahead and continue to use the chat feature, and Sonia will be monitoring that. So we can at any time take questions or comments from you as well. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the survival of the A-plus player. And a final question. Go ahead, Sonia.
Oh, no, please.
A final question might be, so how do we keep these A-plus players? And again, we have to set the environment and create the environment for them. But we also need to remember that past and current behavior predicts future behavior. So if we give the promise of freedom and we give the promise that they're going to be able to excel and thrive in our environment, then we need to actually provide that right environment. And we need to actually believe and have the philosophy that a small team of A-plus players can run circles around a giant team of B and C players. Because if we don't, the implication is that it would be very, very hard to both attract and retain these A-plus players. So the actions, the things that we need to sort of keep these A-plus players active within our organizations is, we need to feed them. We need to nurture them. We need to first understand what their interests are so that we can nurture them. We need to open doors, remove barriers. And when we think about the Hunger Games, it's just like Hamish, the handler, was able to do when he would provide gifts or salve or something to help her continue in the games so that she could actually stay active in the game. So he continued to feed her and to nurture her along the way, especially in the first part of the Hunger Games.
We're here at the college very mindful of the old adage of it's not just enough to have folks on the bus, but they need to be in the right seat and the right people in the right seats aligned the right way to accomplish the mission and vision.
Excellent. That's a great comment. Thank you. So when we think about who and where are our A-plus players, sometimes it's actually difficult for us to identify who these A-plus players are. And many of us have really high expectations, and some of us have accepted mediocrity, and we don't even recognize an A-plus player. So when we think about the Hunger Games, Peeta and Katniss were both from District 12. And in our world, we might view them or say that they were from a tertiary or a depressed market, a place where we wouldn't necessarily expect to find them because they sort of emerged as these A-plus players. So a common issue many organizations, HR leaders, managers, we all have is that we really don't know who our A-plus players are and where we might need additional A-plus players within our department. So, it's sort of all part of succession planning. So let's take a moment and everybody reflect for just a moment and think about who you believe maybe one or two of your A-plus players are, and think about why you consider them an A-plus player. So, get in your mind, you don't need to share a name with us, but, get in your mind one of your A-plus players, and then using the chat feature, if you could sort of paint a picture for us, talk about them or share a little bit with us in a way that makes everyone on the webinar want to recruit them, because this is an A-plus player. So maybe share what they do, maybe share what impact they have. So take just a moment and reflect on that, and then hopefully one or two people on the webinar will choose to share their example with us. I'm going to pause for just a moment.
So this is one of those all-play moments. And I know it's cold out there and we're warming you up with some of these interactive pieces, but as Laura suggested, just share a few of your thoughts through the chat feature with us. So Sherry has chimed in and has suggested good communicators, loyal, dedicated, responsible, self-motivated, earns others' respect.
So those are great descriptors of an A-plus player, and I'm hoping that those descriptors are actually describing a person within your organization, Sherry. I hope you have somebody that you can pinpoint and say that's my A-plus player. So those are great descriptors. One example that I'll share while we're waiting for others who might want to chime in. We have an employee where I am currently working, and she is the director of engagement. And this particular position is only a part-time position, but you wouldn't know from the output and the productivity that this individual, works at or a little bit under 20 hours per week. And the number of people who give unsolicited comments and kudos and thank yous and things to this person and to me about this person is just amazing. I hear how this person has impacted people's lives. I hear how they've made somebody else's life easier. I've heard how they're able to solve a problem quickly. I've heard how responsive they are. And this person has just sort of risen to the top of the group based on how they interact with people and how they lift everybody else up. So that's just another example. Sonia, do you have any other examples before we move on?
I don't at this point. I think everyone is freezing to death in our cold chill.
Okay. Well, I am in Charlotte, North Carolina, and although it is cold, it is above freezing. 40 degrees is cold here, and I am sorry for everybody else's coldness, but I didn't wear a coat to work today.
Don't rub it in.
Sorry. Okay, so let's move on to why our A-plus players choose to be with us. So this is a picture of Katniss and her sister Prim. And for those of you who saw the movie, we know that Prim was actually chosen in the lottery, but Katniss stood up and took her place. And so it's very important to remember that everyone has a personal reason for making whatever choice they made. And as employers, it's really incumbent upon us. So as employers, as HR leaders, as business leaders, we really want to understand what our employees are thinking and why they're choosing to be there, because they all have their own reasons. And in order for them to be successful, we need to understand why they are choosing to be with us. So, all of the wonderful promotion and publicity and cajoling and thoughts about how wonderful or great our organization is, really doesn't matter to an A-plus player. What matters to an A-plus player is whatever their reasons are for being there, that we have been able to nurture those particular reasons. So one of the things that I always encourage people to do when we talk about keeping A-plus players is to first think about who they are, and then to make sure, if you've identified them, that you're keeping up with why they're there and what's happening in their world that makes them want to stay with your organization. So, whether you're in a small organization or a large organization, if you've got a list of, at least a half a dozen A-plus players in your organization and you haven't touched base with them in the last 30 to 60 days, now's a really good opportunity to touch base, because A-plus players do appreciate employers who really know why they're there. So I want to kind of move into how we kickstart success once we actually hire an A-plus player. So let's assume that we've done all of the wonderful promotion and attraction and screening and interviewing and all the things that we do that lead up to actually hiring an A-plus player. And we think about how we're going to kickstart these A-plus players' success. So there's really three basic processes that organizations use, and we sort of begin with the end in mind. And so what I'd like to do is take just a moment and review each process and its purpose. Many of us might use one word and we mean something else, or we might have a combination of two or more of these. So an orientation is actually giving employees access to basic information, programs, services, checklists, things that a new person needs to know, sort of a resource list, if you will. Whereas onboarding is actually our ability to create opportunities for these new employees or new employees to a department. They may not be new to the organization, but we create these opportunities so that they can acquire the necessary knowledge, skills, behaviors, interactions. So we actually create sort of venues for them to become more aware of the work and the people that they will be working with. And then an induction process is where we actually assess the readiness of the new employee to really formally admit them into the position or the organization. So we've said, okay, we've brought you up to speed, we've put you through an orientation process, and now we're ready to say, yes, you have the right to be in the position, there's expectations, there's goals, we'll now coach you. And what happens often for organizations that do not use any type of an induction process is that they think that orientation and onboarding is all that they need, and they begin to expect employees to perform from day one, when really you need the orientation and the onboarding before they really can perform. And so all three of these things are actually used, in the ideal world, all three would be used, in combination and in sequence. In some organizations, there are processes where, you go away for 2 or 3 weeks of training before you actually start your job. That would be orientation, maybe a little of onboarding, and then an induction. Onboarding really allows people in their environment some space and some time to get to know the job and the expectations before they're really expected to do the job. So the induction is sort of that kicking off point where they're expected to do the job. So what I'd like to do now is take a poll, and using the polling feature that's provided, select 1 through 5 in terms of which best describes your current process. And then we'll share some comments as well. If you have any comments, please feel free to use the chat feature. So we'll take just a moment, and Patty, if you can do the poll for us, that would be great. It looks like we have a few coming in.
You've gotten them warmed up now. Everyone knows the all plays and how to identify them now.
All right, excellent. So it looks like some people have actually changed their votes. I've noticed some votes changing in front of my eyes here. But it looks like over half of the people on today's webinar use a combination of 2 of these processes. There's also, maybe a third of us that are using all 3. And then several people have said just onboarding is something that they use. So we didn't have anybody say just orientation, and that's good to know because that would be the very, very basic thing. So knowing that we're using a combination of 2 or 3 of these is fabulous. So what I would share with everybody is that as you evaluate how you are doing your orientation, onboarding, and induction, if you can really define the role that each plays, and not just combine them or think about it in terms of semantics, but to actually really think about how all 3 of these things come together to set our A-plus players up for success, I think that would be great. And again, if anybody would like to, provide any comments or context for why they chose what they did at any time, please feel free to use the chat feature. So let's take just a moment and talk about why we should even bother with a formal process. So when we think about the Hunger Games and we think about all of the preparation that everybody went through, they weren't just selected through the lottery and then show up at the Hunger Games. There was an entire process that they had to go through. There was planning, there was some practice on the field, there was some downtime with mentors, and then they had their actual formal induction, where they were getting prepared and actually groomed and ready to go into the Hunger Games. So when we think about this formal process, it enhances clarity. It gives new employees, A-plus players, the space and the time that they need to really get themselves ready for the new expectations. It boosts engagement, particularly the onboarding part. It allows them to interact with resources and people that they need to be able to interact with. And it allows them some time to become effective organizational members and sort of insiders. When you start day one and you're expected to start performing on the job without the proper orientation or onboarding, it's hard to be an insider. You're constantly saying, I'm new, I don't know the answer to that, or I'm new, I have to ask. So when you're expected to perform that very first day, you're really an outside insider. You're not an insider yet, where if we really take the time and the space to do the formal processes well, the A-plus players become insiders much more quickly. And then, of course, it allows employees to take an active role in getting themselves prepared to be, very effective contributors of the organization. So at this point in the movie, the picture that we're looking at, this scene, Hamish says, "You can do this." Those are the words that he says at this point in the movie. And Hamish is Katniss's mentor. And we know that mentors provide experience. They provide guidance to a less experienced employee. They're a role model. And for those of you who saw the movie, at first we might think he wasn't the best role model. But he survived. And in the Hunger Games, surviving is the thing that makes him, he's been there, and he knew how to get through the Hunger Games. And so he's somebody who had the experience that Katniss would need, and he could share his knowledge and his advice to help the employee, or in this case Katniss, grow professionally. So he serves as a role model. Mentors provide guidance. They share their knowledge. So when we think about a formal mentoring program, it's not the same thing as a buddy system. It's really somebody who's been there, who's had to solve some of the same types of problems as this new A-plus player is. So when I've talked with organizations about why their mentor programs do or don't work, one of the key things I hear from HR leaders about why mentor programs don't work is the match between the mentor and the mentee. And what I have discovered in working with individuals is that often it's because the mentor really didn't have the types of experiences that the mentee needed. And so they were more of a buddy or an inside person, a resource, but they really weren't a mentor. Because in a true mentor relationship, you really need someone who can help navigate. So let's take a moment and think about the benefits of a mentor, maybe the benefits to the employee, the benefits to the employer, the benefits to the mentor, perhaps, and maybe the benefits to the profession or the industry. So let me pause there and see if anyone has any comments about what is the benefits of a mentor, benefits to the employee, employer, mentor, or the profession or industry. And let me I'll take a brief pause and see if anyone has any comments.
Maybe if you don't have comments on the benefits to the employee, employer, or mentor, do you have a mentoring program currently at your organization?
Why don't we do a show of hands on that? Let's use that interact button at the top and see if how many people, just raise your hand if you do have some sort of mentoring program. And then Sonia, if you can tell us what that looks like, and then I do see a couple of comments coming in as well.
Great. So if you don't remember, at the top of your screen there's a button that says Interact. You just click on that button. It'll give you a drop down. So you can either raise your hand or give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down, whether you have a mentoring program. In the meantime, Scott has chimed in and said, able to share experiences, knowledge, and expertise. Large numbers of boomers are retiring every day. New workforce does not have the same knowledge and skill levels. And I think we can all attest to that. Mark chimed in and said, I think that the mentee will have a greater appreciation for the company. They will feel like they are being invested in and feel more ready and willing to give back. And for our mentor program, there are a majority of the participants today saying they do not have a formalized mentoring program in their organization today.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Well, we'll go ahead and move on, and we can, if anybody has any
great comments.
Yeah, thank you very much. So let's talk a little bit about how A+ players actually strategize. So look at the posture of Katniss in this particular position, and for those of you who saw the movie, she was in this posture a lot. And this is the posture of someone who's planning, who's fully present. They are. When I use the word be, that means they're fully present. They're living in the moment. They're evaluating the situation. They're making decisions quickly. They're adapting or they're adjusting swiftly to whatever new information might be coming their way. And they're open. They're very open to new opportunities and new possibilities. So really, if you look at this picture, they're ready. And I think that's sort of the posture of an A+ player. They're always ready. They're ready for what's new. They're ready for change. They're ready. And that's something that you can depend on. And if you're wondering who your A+ players are, look at all of your employees through the lens of who's ready for what's next. So now we're going to move to sort of heightened engagement and look at these three essential strategies. And so when we think about attraction in the context that we're talking right now, we're really talking about the principles of recruitment and how we go about finding and screening and interviewing the right people. In the Hunger Games, there was a selection and an induction process. Eventually, the players go through each major phase of the employee life cycle, but in the case of the Hunger Games, it was a lottery, and obviously in the case of our businesses, we have a better system for attracting talent. When we think about attachment, it's really about that relationship to onboarding and their continued engagement in establishing a sense of fit from the employee's viewpoint. It's making sure that the employee is feeling attached to the organization. And when we think about alignment, what we're looking at is career planning, performance management, training, self-development. It's a combination from all of these things. It's sort of the foundation for engagement because employees cannot be engaged if they don't have all of those other pieces in place. Now, there are other parts to the employee life cycle. There's detachment and transition, but we're not going to really focus on those right now. A couple statistics that you might be interested in knowing about, and this comes from the Society for Human Resource Management. There were some recent surveys done, and 70% of the people who participated in those surveys have formal engagement programs. 30% said that they measured or they evaluate retention, and 100%, which is kind of interesting, said that they've sort of seen the roller coaster for measurement, meaning, sometimes we measure, sometimes we don't. It goes up and down and up and down. And the biggest challenge for HR professionals and employers is really the attraction, attachment, and aligning all three of those things put together in a way that actually equals retention. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how we attract A+ talent. So the first thing obviously we need to do is we need to define what that A+ player really looks like. And we need to view recruitment as a radial relationship. So it's not, it's a relationship that comes from a variety of viewpoints. It's not just from the employer's viewpoint. We have to recognize that A-plus players are also looking for the right match. It's not just us looking for them. And there are sort of, I'm going to skip down to number 7 and 8. When we think about active positioning strategies, we're thinking about how we've clarified the roles and expectations, what kinds of development opportunities we might have for these A-plus players. What does the leadership profile look like? Leadership profile means leadership profile in your organization. What do the people at the top look like and sound like, and are those people that will attract these new A-plus players? The passive positioning strategies are things that new employees or prospective employees notice when they're going through the selection and the interview process. They're looking for, how welcoming your environment might be. Are you culturally inclusive? And they look for signs for that. And there's unintended nuances. You pass by, on a tour, and there's 2 employees, and depending on what you overhear those 2 employees talking about, it could be good or bad or indifferent. There could be some unintended nuances that come out, and those are all going to be sort of passive positioning, and you only have a little bit of control over those key things. So that's really what we're going to talk about in terms of attraction right now. I want to move to attachment. And first of all, attachment is creating this strong emotional bond between the employee and the organization. And we can draw a connection from the Hunger Games and how those relationships were built. And you've got this critical attachment period. When you bring in a new employee or a new person into a department, there's about 120 days that that new employee is kind of going through a process, and the amount of discretionary effort that they will put forth is dependent on how attached they feel to the organization and how attached they feel to their direct manager or their direct supervisor. And these core attachment perceptions, their sense of security, their sense of trust and value, whether they're being accepted, whether they belong, these are all going to play into the risk of attrition, how much discretionary effort they're willing to put forth, and their overall performance. So when we think about the Hunger Games and how attached Katniss was to certain individuals in the movie, we can think about how someone gets attached inside an organization. They need to find people that they're attached to. They need to find systems and processes and things like that they're attached to. So let's pause for just a moment and see if how many people have actually been thinking about attachment. So I know we think about attraction a lot, but how many people have been thinking about attachment? Let's do another show of hands, either using the thumbs up yes or raising your hand. Let me just pause there for just a moment. And Sonia, if you can chime in when you're ready, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. We have folks slowly raising their thumbs or putting their thumbs down. Again, the interaction tool is up at the top of your screen. Just click on that, and then you can share with us if you've been thinking about attachment lately or not. And it looks to be a little bit weighted on the yes side.
Okay, excellent. That's good. Very good. So when we think about paying attention, core attachment perceptions, we need to remember that the greatest predictor of future performance is how attached someone is to the organization. So we're going to be moving to alignment in just a moment, but when we think about attachment, we think about how Katniss earned the respect and support of all the districts and how she herself came to become sort of more attached to the work, and then, of course, she became attached to the resistance later in the series. So the more attached she became, the more effective she was, the more productivity, the more the organization that she was a part of actually benefited. And that's the same in all of our organizations as well. So, we all know that a team or an organization has to sort of recalibrate each time a new person joins. So that productivity of all individuals, whether they're A-plus players or not, it involves discretionary effort, and this engagement that we're hoping for from all employees is sort of a function of attachment. And retention actually relies and can be predicted on sort of a combination of attachment and then moving into alignment. So where engagement is a function of how sort of attraction and attachment and alignment kind of all work together, retention can actually be predicted and controlled, because as engagement goes up, retention goes up. So I'm probably not sharing something that's new, but it's really important to focus in on attachment and then alignment. So let's take a minute and talk about alignment. So alignment is really all about capacity, it's about contribution, and it's about fit. And alignment is constantly adjusting as needs of the organization change and as employees grow and develop and get new experiences. So if we think about these three circles and how they interact, I'm sure that most people on the webinar today are familiar with the concept of a sweet spot. So that sweet spot is right in the middle where all three circles interact. So where we have the organization needs or priorities, things that the organization absolutely must have, and when we have employee interest and experience and systems and resources that are all in alignment with each other, where there is some sort of crossover, right in the middle is the sweet spot for the employee and for the organization. So if we think about if the organization needs change and grow and that circle moves, so if this was an animated circle and it was moving, if the employee interest and experience did not move and the systems and resources circle did not move, then that sweet spot's going to go away because the organizational needs is sort of, cycling somewhere else, and the employees and the systems to support the organization aren't moving with it. So if any one of these three circles are not connected in some way with each other, then we're going to be out of alignment. And what happens a lot in organizations is that the organizational needs change, but what the employees are interested in, their skills, their experience, all the things that they bring to the organization that used to be fabulous and used to be in complete 100% alignment are no longer in alignment. And then there's this big disconnect, and that's where we look at termination. That's where we look at maybe coaching or career planning and moving people, versus an ongoing system where you're constantly looking at an employee and their interest and their experience and making sure that they're moving as the organization needs are moving. If the employee's interest and experience completely start moving and the organizational needs don't move, that's when we start seeing an employee leaving the organization on their own because they're looking for something different that the organization just doesn't have a need for. And then if systems and resources are stagnant and they do not keep up with organizational needs, we might have fabulous, wonderful A-plus employees who are bringing passion and vision and interest and experience, and we might have organizational needs and priorities that are in alignment. But then if our systems and resources aren't keeping up, then of course we experience frustration, and that's another place where we start to lose employees. So I'm going to pause there for just a moment and see if anybody has any thoughts or comments or questions about the alignment piece before we go on.
So if you do have any questions or comments, feel free to use the chat box to the left of your screen and share them with Laura and I. Doesn't look like we have any right now, Laura, but we'll reserve the right for the participants to chime in at any later date.
All right, sounds good. Okay, so we're moving kind of into the wrap-up section of today's webinar. And this is a chart that I have used with several clients and in speaking at some conferences. And it has to do with taking a pulse on your organization. So what happens is, let's assume that something's wrong. You're not exactly sure what it is. Either somebody's not performing, or you just can't figure out what somebody does or why they're having a hard time doing something. But something's wrong in the organization. There's some sort of misalignment or misattachment or some sort of disconnect in some way, and you're not exactly sure what it is. So in the Hunger Games, survival of the fittest, and the playing field was limited because of the way that the games worked. In our world, it's exactly the same thing, but of course, nobody gets injured. So when we think about taking a pulse on our organization, we need to keep in mind that over 90% of attrition occurs within the first 18 months of employment. And when it's determined by the employee, that means that the employee made the decision to leave versus the organization letting go of that employee. That typically happens in the first 18 months. So the highest amount of turnover where it's employee-driven is happening within the first 18 months of somebody joining the organization or joining the team, which is an extremely costly fact to an organization. So where attrition occurs between sort of that 90th day of employment, before the 90th day of employment, it's usually because of one of 5 reasons. So either the first reason is something like circumstances beyond your control as an employer, meaning, a spouse has moved and the family is moving, or, something that really doesn't have anything to do with the employee and the organization. So we're going to put that one aside, and we're going to think about 4 key reasons. So if we look at the bottom left corner of the chart and we think about having the wrong person in the wrong job, this is usually a systemic issue. It means that we either have poor leadership or poor accountability or a poor process. Meaning, we have, the person isn't right, the job isn't right, it's a no-win situation for the organization. If we look at the wrong person, so we're at the far left still, but at the top, we've got the job right. We know what it is we want, but we've got the wrong person. Then what we have is poor alignment, and typically that has to do with our recruitment practices. We selected the wrong person for that particular job, or that employee's interests and experiences have moved in their circle, and now we have poor alignment because it's the wrong person, but the job itself is still the right job for the organization. And in that case, a decision would need to be made because you can't keep someone in a poor aligned kind of a situation. If we look at the bottom again and we've got the right person, but it's the wrong job, so it's the right person on the bus, but we have them in the wrong spot, then it's poor job definition for that particular person, and we need to start thinking about whether there's another position in the organization for them. And then we still have something wrong. If we have the right person and it's the right job, then there's a problem with attachment. So we've got someone, we recruited the right person, we know their interests and experiences align, we know the organization needs are there, we know that we have the right systems and processes and everything, then what we have is an attachment issue. And we need to look at all 4 of these boxes because in all cases, what you would do might be different in each case. But in all cases, something needs to be done because any attrition prior to 18 months equates to a huge financial loss for the business. So typically it's going to land in one of these 4 areas, and once you know what area you're in, the problem that you're actually dealing with, that will actually help you know how to move forward. And that's something that we're not going to have time on today's webinar to go into the details of each of these 4 boxes, but I know that if you're interested in any of that, I know that there are services that Anne Arundel can provide for you. So I am going to turn this over to Sonia for some final thoughts, and I would just share that I hope that there was something that came out of today's webinar that was useful to you. I hope there was a nugget or something that you could say that you've taken back that will be useful to you as you think about how to attract and retain and activate your A-plus players in your organization. So thank you for having me today, and I'll go ahead and turn this over to Sonia.
Thank you so much, Laura. I do think that you gave us quite a bit to think about today. Are there questions for Laura? We have reserved a few minutes so that we could field questions while we have her as a captive audience. Hopefully, again, she said, that we've given you some food for thought as it pertains to your own talent and talent management. Do you have or need A-plus players? How do you attract them, attach them to the organization, and gain alignment? But while we have Laura, do we have some questions from the field that you'd like Laura to address? And just ask that you use the chat feature to the left of your screen. And as we wait for those questions, if there are questions, as Laura had mentioned, if there are some other thoughts or some pieces to the webinar that we didn't have time for that you'd like assistance with from the college, you can feel free to get in touch with any of our personnel, and we'd be more than happy to help you address those issues or challenges. And at the end of this webinar, you'll receive a survey that will address some of those concerns, so you can send those directly to us without more than just a click of the button. So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sonia, I think there was a question about whether the presentation will be available after the webinar.
You are correct. Sorry, I had to scroll down. The presentations are always available. They will be sent directly to you as your parting gift for spending your time with us this afternoon. So those will be sent directly to your inbox, but all of our webinars are posted to our website. So at any point in time, the recording will be available. So you'll have it in two ways. Absolutely. So give us 24 to 48 hours to have it posted. You'll see it in your in-bin for joining us today. Any other questions before we finalize our time? On behalf of our technical support, Patty, our subject matter expert, Dr. Laura Bernstein, and myself, I'd like to thank you for spending your time with us, especially with Snowmageddon coming our way. And as you conclude with us today, you will have a short survey that will be sent to you. We really appreciate your feedback. That's what helps us to know what the needs are of your organizations to help to provide, I think, this invaluable experience in webinar series to your organization. So please give us your feedback in that survey. If there's no other questions, I will let you go, and thank you all for joining us.